Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And we are back here on Go Astros, day one of the lockout. And unlike Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly, we're not bailing on anyone in the middle of the night. We are here for you. Gentlemen, how's everybody doing? How was your Thanksgiving?
So I'm a fan of a football team that both lost Lincoln Riley for rumors, agreed to let Calling Baton Rouge be played at another team stadium because they thought they were getting Lincoln Riley, and then got Brian Kelly. So I am confused by the whole college football thing. Fortunately, baseball will provide me, well, no respite from that.
Yeah, not a single bit.
And I'm a fan of a team that lost to that team that he's talking about on a fumble that was never called, but that's neither here nor there.
And I'm a fan who doesn't get to go to a bowl game because the one time I put my faith in the fighting Texas Aggies, they disappoint me.
I mean, I could give you years of examples of where that would happen.
That is true. Let's talk generally, guys. Editor's note, I guess, or producer's note. I had not been to MLB.com until right before we logged in. Brian, you told me to check it out, and there is no mention of any current player that I can see. Just overall, before we kind of dive into it, what are your broad strokes feelings about where we are with this thing? Brian, we'll start with you.
I mean, it's not a big deal today. It's, easier to make jokes about what's going on MLB.com and to make replacement player jokes. The big question is, do they get this resolved before, in time for there to be a normal opening day? So we will not remember this lockout if it gets resolved on February 1st. It'll be something that someone's like mentioned, oh yeah, they had that lockout back in 2021, 2022, and that'll be a footnote. The question is, how long does it go? I suspect it will go into late January, February, because neither side has much incentive to move until they're actually losing something, and no one loses anything in baseball revenue in December.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, other than free agent signings, there was nothing that was happening in the month of December that dramatically affects Major League Baseball one way or the other in a normal season. So to Brian's point, we all knew this was coming. Anybody who didn't know there was going to be a lockout was fooling themselves or really doesn't understand how labor relations work. It becomes an issue mid-January if there's no substantial movement, because it does, even if they all agree, at 10 o'clock this morning, it takes a couple of days to get those things in place. Things have to go in front of lawyers. Certain members of both parties have to sign off, and that just takes time. So mid-January puts you to the 1st of February, and knowing pitchers and catchers normally report mid-February, you start getting a time crunch. Florida, unfortunately, is the first affected in that kind of world because of spring in Arizona. So if spring training is affected, that affects the revenues and the money coming into those cities. Baseball in and of itself, from a major league product, though, doesn't really get affected till probably end of February, beginning of March, where the regular season could potentially be jeopardized because you could condense. And frankly, Major League Baseball Players Association would love it if they would condense spring training because they think it's a drag.
I just look at
Verlander and Schwartz, Max Scherzer, who need the extra time because they're 103 years old.
I just feel like just the idea of another season in a row with a weird start, and I just don't know how good that's going to be for the game. I want to talk a little bit real quick about some free agent stuff. One of the sort of broad strokes things that I noticed is, there was a lot of money thrown around by a lot of teams that weren't very good last year. I noticed, Andy, we'll start with you on that, but I noticed that the Astros obviously signed Verlander, but the Astros, the Yankees, the Dodgers, the teams that have been competitive year in and year out, relatively quiet. And it was the teams that felt grasping at straws, like what the Rangers did, which I just thought was hilarious. Andy, I mean, what did you take from sort of that flurry of craziness for that 36 hours that went by?
Well, our second favorite team on this show, the Arlington Rangers, spent something like $300 million in a single day.
I think it's more like 500, wasn't it?
Yeah, to be the last place team in the AL West again next year. And they're even saying that, hey, this isn't really going to help us for 2021. This is really a 2022 move and a 2023 move. Well, great, but you signed a player who's 31 years old in Andrelton Simmons, who is going to be 33 at the point that you're competitive.
Was it Simmons or Simeon?
I'm sorry, Simeon. You're right.
Yeah, Simeon.
They are interchangeable in my mind, and I know they're not. And somebody who follows shortstops from the ex-AL West shortstops will tell me how wrong I am. But he's a guy that is a good player now. At the end of that contract will be a giant liability, which, by the way, Corey Seager will probably also be a giant liability at the end of a 10-year contract. It's that problem that the Astros are facing. And I know we're going to talk about that probably separately, but giving anybody a 10-year contract puts you at the wrong end of somebody who's 37 years old at some point playing the field. That very rarely works out. And if you want a real-time example, you look at Albert Pujols' stay in Los Angeles for the last decade.
Brian.
Yeah, I mean, the Rangers moves were, so frankly, as an Astros fan, I'm real happy that Marcus Semien is in Arlington and not in Seattle, which I think would have been a move that would have had much more impact on the AL West race in 2022, or more likely in 2023. But the Mariners pivoted and got Robbie Ray, AL Cy Young Award winner, though none of us think he's the best pitcher in the AL, sort of generally. I think he had a really good year, and certainly will improve the Mariners' rotation. But the Rangers move is just what Andy said. It's real curious because the Rangers don't have. One thought I had watching the Rangers, as much as we watched the Rangers last year, is particularly early in the season, is who on that team is going to be on their next playoff team.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the season, I assume some pitcher will be maybe Taylor Hearn will be the Brad Peacock of that Rangers team, and maybe IKF will be their utility infielder, but there weren't a lot of those players. They got some players towards the end of the season where I could see them developing into that. Okay, we now know that Semien and Seager will be on that team, but when is that team coming? Because they have a deep organization, but they don't have a handful of sort of, surefire,
just the one kid who hit nothing but home runs against us felt like the only one that you thought, okay, he might be something for the future of that team.
Yeah. And he's also Garcia's 28. He's a rookie, but he's not a young player by this by this definition. So will he be 30, 31, 32 and their fourth outfielder by then? Maybe. Seattle's a little different because Seattle's prospects are starting to come in Jared Kelenic, or right on the cusp, like players like Julio Rodriguez, who will be another outfielder for him, Emerson Hancock, who's another pitcher. And, so getting Robbie Ray is someone who will help the Mariners, particularly, I think, in 23 and 2024, when they may be the best team. They'll be challenging the Astros to be the best team in the American League West. But at the same time, they got a one-year solution at second base with Adam Frazier rather than getting Marcus Semien. We may see them get another third baseman. They could sign. They've been rumored to be attached with Chris Bryant, so that may be someone who we're talking about after the lockout, whenever that happens.
After the lockout. Andy, you were going to chime in with something?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels between the way the Mariners spent money over the last couple of weeks and the way they seem to be building that roster to what we saw in Houston in 2016, 2017. They had a very good year out of the blue, kind of like the Astros did in 2015.
Yeah,
I fully expect them to take a little bit of a step back this year, because where they don't match up real well is they don't have a lot of organizational pitching depth. Ray certainly helps that situation. And he's a veteran guy. He's going to eat innings for them, provided he stays healthy. But I don't see that they have a 1 through 5 rotation that's going to strike fear in the rest of baseball. And the Astros were on their way to that at that point. But I think Mariners are making smart moves and spending money, but spending money on a team that can win within this next window. The Rangers, it almost feels to me like John Daniels and Chris Young have believed that there's going to be a salary ceiling or a salary floor in baseball. So they decided we better go spend some money now and might as well get Seager to get the headlines. Because, if you look at the projected WAR for the team they've put together as of right now, it's still a last place team by a lot.
Yeah, and Brian, you posted a chart that showed just how far behind they still were.
Yeah, they're still in 5th place, so they're real close to the A's. The A's are at 33 projected wins above replacement. The Rangers at 32. The A's haven't traded anybody away, which we expect they'll do again after the lockout. So I think that'll
sort of a like a garage sale before you move kind of deal.
Yeah. But it's the Astros are at 46 wins or over replacement. They're ahead of everyone else in the division. They're clearly the favorites. They're clearly the favorites walking in to spring training if and when we get spring training. So what I think these moves have done, and worth noting here, the Mariners won 90 games and were in the playoff hunt until the last day, but they had the record of it. They had the run differential of a team that should have won 76.
I mean, it prompted the social media movement of the fun differential, right? Like they even embraced the fact that they were playing a little over their heads.
Right. Yeah. And it's similar to the year the A's had a couple of years ago where they won 97 games and they were pulling, I think they pulled Vida Blue out of a retirement home to start a couple games at the end of the season where they were both had that.
Vida Blue reference, everybody.
So look, the Mariners, we should project them as a 76 win team. And, but again, the moves were made here have more effect, not on the 2022 race. They'll have some, but more on 2023, 2024, 2025. The Mariners seem to project to be a real good team that would challenge the Astros for the division title. The Rangers may get that at some point in the future, but this is though the Astros went and signed Carlos Beltran in 2014, anticipating they wanted him on the team in 2017, which not going to do much for him this year. But they got to have a nice press conference yesterday, and I'm sure they'll sell a few more season tickets to people to come out to the shed.
I'm sure jersey sales are way up.
To come out to the shed. That was so petty. I love everything about that. Last on the Rangers, because I want to dive into sort of a controversy that Andy alerted me to that I think has gotten bigger, and I don't, we'll get to it, but I was listening to a bit of a Buster Olney interview on a Houston radio station, and he said that the Rangers were still 15 players away, and I laughed at that. Like, 15 players is more than half your active roster. So, okay. So Andy, why don't you set up the Correa drama, because you're the one who discovered it first. And we were sort of referring to friend of the show, Michael Schwab's almost violent defense of the rumor, but can you set it up for us?
Yeah. So I'm digging around Twitter, and Schwab is one of my follows. So, he pops up in my timeline fairly frequently, and he's a very active poster. And I saw, the words, "That's a bald-faced lie," or "That's a complete total lie," something along those lines. So I have to dig into what he's quote tweeting about. Evidently somebody who has access to a minority partner in the Astros was talking to a Rockets beat reporter, kind of opining out loud about why Correa's had trouble signing, which is not really a thing. He hasn't had trouble. He is elected not to make a choice yet. There's a difference there. And claiming that, well, the reason that nobody's going to sign him is because his back issues are worse than anybody is aware of. He might not even pass a physical if he has to sign a new contract, which is why he's not going to get more than 6 years from anybody. And Schwab, I like Michael, so I'll just start off there. But it felt like he was defending his girlfriend's honor the way he just violently ran to the internet. "That's a complete lie.
Yeah.
He's played 90% of the games for the last 2 years, ignoring the fact that he missed most of the 2 years prior to that with back problems, and claiming now that he doesn't have back problems and never had back problems, which is super weird because we all know that he went on the DL twice.
And the stories of him having to lay on the plane.
Yeah, lay flat on the floor of the plane to make it through a series in Oakland, and had to go back early. I think it was in the 2019 season, had to go back early so he could stretch out for a series that mattered towards the end of the year. That's the story. I guess it got a little bit more interesting from there.
Yeah, it got interesting from there. Again, Buster Olney on the same thing. And basically what Buster Olney kind of indicated was that Correa was not allowing full access to medical records until the offer was big enough. And of course, teams don't make a big enough offer. I don't think there's a lot to it. I think that teams are going to look at the last year and a half of what he did and sign him. I don't think there's a lot to it. It's just such a weird deal. Brian, have you any thoughts on any of that? Have you heard any of this?
I mean, just the tiniest bit. And, look, if you are a minority owner of the Astros, you would like Carlos Correa to not sign the Corey Seager contract, because then you have to pay it and you get more money in your pocket. So fair enough. Try to drive down the price. And, it's always worth noting these leaks are not leaked because, people feel out of the goodness of their heart they want to tell us stuff. It's because they have some reason to say it, and, they have to get some benefit from it. Correa, of course, has played, looking up his numbers right now, he played 58 of the 60 games in 2020 and 148 of the 162 games in 2021. Excellent health record those 2 years. But 2017, he played 109 games. In 2018, he played 110 games. In 2019, he played 75 games. He's on the injured list a lot. He's done things to try to adjust for that. He's developed apparently a completely different stretching routine that takes a really long time before games. So again, it seems to have paid off, right? Both in terms of, he's one of the best players in baseball in 2021, and he was healthy for the entirety of the 2 seasons, including the short season. So, good for Correa, and I'm happy we benefited as Astros. Is it an issue? Yeah. It's worth noting he's played, I think, the exact same amount of games over the last several years as Corey Seager. It's in a little different way because Seager was out this year with, I think he broke his wrist early in the season, and he had Tommy John surgery a couple of years ago, which is unusual for a shortstop. That didn't stop Seager from getting 10 years and $32 million a year. Right. And I don't think it'll stop Correa from getting a really, really large contract.
I don't want to go too far down this because I do think it's simply, like you're saying, Brian, suppressing the market. But Andy, rebut Brian for a second. Getting a broken wrist or Tommy John is different than a back injury, right? Like
it is. And I don't want to play doctor because I haven't done that since I was about 17 and I am happily married. So I'm going to stay with that. The 75 game season in 2019 that Brian mentioned, a good chunk of that was because he broke a rib during a massage, as we all infamously know and wink at a number of times in our lives. Massage. So I don't think you put all the missing games on that, on the back, but he did miss time because of his back prior to that. Back issues are an interesting thing, and I will speak from somebody who has a degenerative disc and a herniated disc that I live with. I threw my back out the first time when I was 20 years old frying bacon in the back of a restaurant. I sneezed, fell to the ground, and I've had back issues literally ever since. And I might go 2 years with no incidents, and then I might go 6 consecutive months where I'm having spasms. And there's no amount of weight loss or stretching or health that I can do because it just comes up when it comes up.
Sure.
Short of having a back surgery, which I've elected not to do to this point in my life. I don't know the extent of Correa's injuries with his back. I don't know exactly what the damage has been done, how much of it is structural, how much of it is nerve related, whatever it is. But it is a concern. Is it an overriding factor that's going to keep a team from signing him? Absolutely not.
No.
That's not a thing that's going to happen. Does it mean that somebody's going to give a little bit more pause than they would about signing to a 10-year contract? Sure, and they should. It's 10. We're talking about $320 million. And I know we tend to talk about baseball salaries as monopoly money, but that's a lot of money. And even if you don't think it's a lot of money, that's a 10-year investment on a roster space on your team. Players don't get better as they get older. So there's a risk factor there. And if I am buying a car for $40,000, I'm going to look at the safety record of that car.
Yeah.
Before I sign those papers. So yes, somebody about to plunk down $320, $330, $340 million is absolutely going to want to know everything. I don't even know how you would get away with not releasing medical records until you got the offer you were looking for. But even if he's doing that, he's still going to have to pass a physical unless something dramatic changes in the CBA, all players who sign contracts have to pass physicals before they can sign those contracts, before those contracts can be executed.
Okay.
So it's talk about it now, talk about it later. It's going to get talked about. And if he fails a physical, guess what happens to his market after that?
He's back here in Houston on a high AAV short-term deal.
And I have your qualifying offer, please.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit real quick. There's a part of me that's just a nervous Nelly about stuff. Brian, are we worried that the Justin Verlander deal has not been made official yet, that has only really been reported so far, right, just by his brother? Now, I don't think he would make his brother look stupid. So what is your level of concern?
It is, had you asked me this yesterday or 2 days ago, I'd have said none. I'm sure they're going to do this. And yesterday they moved Andre Scrub off the 40-man roster to create a space for Justin Verlander. So that means my concern today is a very little bit, but not zero. That they didn't do it, and he's the only major free agent who agreed to a contract before and then wasn't officially added is different. But we'll see what happens. My guess is this is mostly just a technicality, and that it's probably something we're going to worry too much about. But since we have no other information, yeah, I'm worrying a little bit about it.
Andy?
I'm not worried, and I think technicality is probably the right word. There's a certain timing that has to happen when a player's. The first move was the 40-man roster spot had to be cleared. For whatever reason, the Astros did not do that until yesterday officially, with Andre Scrub being outrighted to AAA. Then Verlander would have had to sign, but like we just talked about, a physical has to happen. And there has to be a certain amount of hours. It takes a certain amount of hours for that physical to happen, to get submitted to the major league office, and for them to sign off on it. So it very well could have been that all the steps had in place and we ran out of time before they closed their doors at 5 o'clock Eastern time. And it could be the very first thing that happened, very first transaction that happens when the lockout is lifted. And that's kind of where I see it going. I don't think Verlander is the kind of guy that's going to jerk the franchise around. I don't think he would renege on, the verbal agreement that they have, barring something substantial changing in the Major League Baseball landscape. And not less than zero, maybe just a hair above zero.
Okay.
But just it's not something I'm going to lose any sleep over.
All right. Last question before we get out of here then. And we'll start with Brian. One of the things that I've seen forecasted is once this thing is over, that it really becomes the potential for a lot of players scrambling and accepting probably smaller deals than they would have if they were able to sign before this happened. Is that where you see the Astros filling some needs? And is that what you see happening?
Possibly so. There seem to be two potential places where they would make an addition. And obviously they can go to the trade market as well. But one would be for another reliever. They signed Hector Neris to a 2-year deal, more than I thought he would have gotten, but someone they definitely believe in. They could add another reliever to the bullpen, I think on a lesser contract. And there's a question of what they're going to do at shortstop. Are they just going to give the job to Jeremy Pena? Are they going to go find a short-term solution like an Andrelton Simmons or a Jose Iglesias? Or, of course, are they going to surprise us all and actually bring back Correa on a long-term deal? I think the middle option is the most likely, but, all I can do is speculate. And right now, not sure we're going to get much information to change anything until the lockout's over.
Andy, what do you think? How do you think all this shapes up at the mad dash?
I think, what has happened in history is going to happen again. You are going to see players who you probably wouldn't expect to be attainable for shorter deals or more front-loaded contracts, fewer years, that kind of thing. The Astros, in my mind, have to answer the question in the center field. I know that there's some belief that there's a combination of Jake Myers and Chas McCormick that is a serviceable center fielder, and that's probably true. But it is a spot you could upgrade, especially with the uncertainty around Myers' shoulder and the recovery time from that. I mean, shoulder surgeries are a big deal. Sometimes players don't come back from them. I don't think that's the case, but it's something they certainly have
It
to
was
be
a
aware
vicious
of.
injury though. Like
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
I mean, and shortstop is obviously a concern for anybody in the franchise. I still think the most likely path, to Brian's point, is find a 1 to 2 year stopgap so Pena can continue to season a little bit. But somebody who has some flexibility. There were some rumors going around last week, the week before, that the Astros had approached Trevor Story in regards to his ability to play center field at some point in the future, which is to me, hey, you're going to come be our shortstop now, but we really are high on Pena. In a couple of years, you could be our starting center fielder. What does that feel like to you? And I don't know where those talks went, and maybe they go nowhere. But I think the Astros are being creative in how they're going to approach that. But all the signs, unless Correa comes back and says, you know what, 6 years is fine, give me $30 million a year, and I'll still be 32 by the time I get my next contract, kind of thing. I think that's the way we go. And as we mentioned it kind of at the top, or maybe this was offline, we'll remember Correa fondly. We'll give him a video the first time he shows up at Minute Park. And then the next guy who performs really, really well at shortstop, we'll fall in love with, just like we have in the past. It is how baseball teams work. And frankly, if the Astros truly are embracing the Cardinals model of building a franchise, that's what we're going to be. And there's going to be some guys we hitch our wagons to, and apparently that is Altuve and Bregman. Correa was offered what we are willing to spend, and I don't see Crane budging much higher than that. Unless, here's the caveat to that. If the CBA comes back out and the competitive balance tax threshold is much, much higher, or if there's some introduction of a franchise tag or Larry Bird type tag, to quote a couple of other major sports in this country, where you can sign a guy that doesn't affect anything and give him whatever you want, that's a possibility. I still don't know that we do that for Correa if that kind of thing exists. But there's a lot of uncertainty now in the world because we don't know what baseball is going to look like from a financial standpoint when it comes back sometime in the spring, hopefully.
The thing that concerns me is I understand, and I don't even disagree with the idea of a Myers-McCormick center field, but I don't want to see a Myers-McCormick center field and a Jeremy Pena shortstop at the same time. You can give up offensive production at one of those two spots, but I don't think you can necessarily give it up for both and then turn yourself into a much more pedestrian offensive team.
Well, it's the other interesting thing too, is that Jeremy Pena is not the only major league projected player the Astros have in the minors. So the franchise is still very high on Pedro Leon, who is a center fielder and has been tried out at shortstop last year, was given a lot of innings there. That part of the experiment seems to have gone by the wayside a little bit.
Yeah, I think the rise of Pena helped that, but yeah.
Yeah, so you've got that, but you have somebody who the team feels can be a center fielder next year, maybe. Leon's very raw. You've got Corey Lee coming up to address in a very low-cost way your catching situation. So you have some dollars that'll be able to be spent there when Maldonado and Castro go by the wayside. So there's going to be some freedom, but again, there's so much now uncertainty because I can't tell you, okay, well, you can only spend $230 million or else you've got this penalty tax that nobody wants to pay, because that may not be the number anymore. That threshold might not even exist anymore. We don't have it.
And and Brian, before I get to you, that goes back to our earlier point of why it seems like some of the already established teams waited instead of just jumping at some of the free agents and overspending. Brian, just your thoughts on my point about giving up offense at two positions and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and they give up offense at catcher, at least until they get Corey Lee up here, and we'll see what kind of offensive player Corey Lee is. But they have they have really good offense at the rest of the positions. Worth noting on the 2023 team, Michael Brantley and Yuli Gurriel's contract will expire, and so they'll need to either re-sign or replace them. So kind of in my head, I'm thinking Pedro Leon is essentially replacing Michael Brantley in the outfield, or at least that's what I hope we get in 2023, both from a financial standpoint, from an on-field production standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, because in 2023, Jose Urquidy, Kyle Tucker, and Yordan Alvarez will all be eligible for arbitration for the first time. So the payroll is going to go down a little bit this year, but it'll increase next year when those guys start getting salaries closer to their value.
Then we start thinking about extensions for some of them too, particularly Tucker. So it's okay. So that's going to wrap us up this time. Now I'm going to leave you guys a little bit of a homework assignment for our next episode in a couple of weeks. I want you all to come up with 2 of who you would induct next into the Astros Hall of Fame. These are the kinds of things we're talking about during a lockout. All right. Until then, guys, thanks for jumping on. Go Stros.
Go Stros, and go resolution to the lockout.
Go Astros, and look out soon for the volume 2 of the Italian menu, because that's who we'll be.
Don Gillingham, our biggest fan, is so excited about that, Andy. You have no idea. He brings that up to me at least once a week. That's his favorite segment we've ever done. So
Great.
there you go.